Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining today to discuss the EECBG application and state and local clean energy partnership opportunities. My name is Grace Lowe, and I'm a program manager at NASEO, or the National Association of State Energy Officials. And before we get started, I just wanted to review the agenda for today, as well as some webinar logistics. So we will get started with some introductions as well as an overview of the EECBG application process and eligible activities. And then we'll hear from a panel of state and local leaders. And afterwards, we'll hear from Audrey Bragg with E for the Future on an overview of the programs and policies in a Box platform. And then finally, we'll end with some Q&A as well as some Zoom poll questions for you all. And just a quick Zoom reminders, this is a Zoom webinar format, so everyone's automatically muted, but please feel free to include questions or comments in the Q&A function throughout the webinar. And we are recording this webinar and we'll be posting the slides and recording on NASEO's website in the next few days. And if you have any questions during the webinar or afterwards, feel free to reach out to me or Sandy Fazeli. And with that, I'll pass it over to Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. I'm Carolyn Barrett. I'm with the National League of Cities on the Federal Advocacy team, and I cover the energy and environment portfolio for NLC. We represent 19,000 cities, towns, and villages, and we're focused on improving the quality of life for members and supporting local leaders. Sandy?
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Fazeli. I'm a Senior Managing Director here at the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASEO. NASEO represents the 56 energy offices from the states, territories, and the District of Columbia. The state energy offices are typically designated by governors to lead clean energy, economic development, and climate policy planning, and program and project implementation at the state level. So here at NASEO, we have a wide array of programs that reflect those various priorities, whether energy efficient buildings and clean transportation, grid issues, clean and renewable energy deployment, and energy security and resilience, financing, equity, and workforce development. And of course, we've also been keeping track of the various provisions from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, including EECBG, which we'll be tackling here today. Happy to answer any questions about NASEO, but with that, I'll turn it over to Audrey Bragg from E for the Future.
Thanks, Sandy. Hello, everyone. Audrey Bragg. I'm the Director of Policy at E for the Future, which is a nonprofit focused on clean, efficient energy solutions. And I'm looking forward to discussing the programs and policy in a Box platform. With that, I'll hand it back over to Carolyn.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Audrey. So over the next few slides, Carolyn and I will walk through key aspects of the EECBG application process that we think are worth flagging to you all. We know that DOE's Office of State and Community Energy Programs has been really proactive and communicative in providing webinars and making their team available. So we'll try to avoid being too redundant, but we do want to make sure that you have multiple chances to process the information and develop a game plan, and also to make ourselves available if you'd like to brainstorm anything. I do want to take a quick moment to thank Carolyn and NLC, as well as E for the Future, for their partnership, and also their commitment to elevating the importance of state and local coordination in pursuing clean energy, economic development, and climate goals. Over my past 10 years here at NASEO, I've found that no state and city or local partnership looks the same, but I have found that when those partnerships happen, it can really provide important benefits for communities. So just really grateful for everybody here making the time today. And of course, we're also really interested in learning from you. So please let us know, what did we miss? What might we have gotten wrong in this webinar? What are you interested in delving into further? We'll have some poll questions towards the end of our time together, but also feel free to use the Q&A and the chat to share your perspectives. And I'll next turn it over to Carolyn to get us started.
Thank you, Sandy. And it's great to partner with you and NASEO and Audrey and E for the Future. And thanks everyone for joining today. So we're going to go through, as Sandy said, some of the logistics about what you need to know about the EECBG. But as you're listening, I want you to think about ways that you can collaborate with neighboring jurisdictions on a regional basis and with your state, so that these funds can have the maximum benefit and maximum leverage for your communities and your regions and your state. So you probably have already looked up, or maybe you did, how much funds your community is getting, but you should also look to see who else is getting funding, what neighboring cities and counties, and reach out to them and see how you can leverage each other's projects and programs. The EECBG provides a great opportunity for regional collaboration, as many communities are coming to the table with some funding. And so how can that be put to best use? And of course, think about your state. We'll go through, they are required to pass through some of their grant money to smaller communities, but you should also think of them as a partner and how you can leverage your funds with those of the state and their priorities as well. So let's get started here. So the EECBG, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, was created in 2007 and funded only one time previously until now, and that was under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. EECBG supports states, territories, and tribes and cities and counties in reducing energy use, reducing fossil fuel emissions, improving energy efficiency, investing in renewable energy. These flexible block grant funds can be used for a variety of projects to address climate change. In 2009, the program received $3.2 billion. We're thrilled that EECBG was funded under the bipartisan infrastructure law, but unfortunately, it's a much smaller pot of funding, only $550 million. Nonetheless, this is an important program for states and local governments because it's going to reach so many communities directly, and because it's flexible to be used in a variety of ways, similar to the Community Development Block Grant. What you'll see linked on this slide is DOE's one-stop shop for everything you need to know, all the templates and allocation amounts for this program. Next slide. So there are a couple types of grant funding here. So first, formula grants represent the largest portion of EECBG funding. Of the $550 million total funding, about $431 million will go out via formula. For local governments, the formula is based on the 2020 census data, as well as daytime population, other similar factors determined by DOE. Using this formula, DOE calculated which cities meet the population threshold, and only those cities that are on the list are eligible to receive the formula funds. For cities, direct formula grants are going to communities with a population of 35,000 or more, or one of the 10 largest cities in the state. So of the $431 million, $299 million is going out via formula to cities and counties, and this represents 68% of the funds. Sandy?
Thanks. And of course, next up on the list are the 56 states and territories, which are getting $123 million or thereabouts, 28% of the funds, and then tribes are set to receive the remaining 2%. So within that state pot, states are required to pass through or sub-award at least 60% of their funding to smaller local governments that do not meet the population threshold. And I'll walk through some of the details on that on the next slide. But I definitely recommend that state energy offices start thinking about how to structure those sub-grants sooner rather than later. And also of note, DOE plans to open a small competitive program with $8.8 million of the funds. And that competitive program will be available only to local governments that do not meet the DOE formula threshold. So if you did the math, you'll notice that the funds going to state, cities, tribes, and for the competitive program equal $440 million out of the total $550 million funded through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for EECBG. So for the remaining $110 million, DOE will use this for program delivery and to provide technical assistance to eligible entities throughout the lifetime of the EECBG program. Next slide, please. So this slide should actually just say state subgrants because the territories are exempt from the subgrant requirement, as is the District of Columbia. The EECBG authorizing statute requires that each state receiving a grant must use no less than 60% to provide subgrants to local governments that are not eligible for direct formula grants from DOE. And in addition, this table just points out some of the limits on administrative expenses. So you'll see that the cap for states on administration, including the cost of reporting, is 10%. For local and tribal governments receiving formula grants directly from DOE, the limit is 10% or $75,000, whichever is greater. And for recipients that are not eligible under the formula directly, there is no administrative cap. Just to sort of provide my own read on some of the state subgrant language, first off, there seems to be quite a bit of flexibility in the EECBG application for states to design the subgrant programs however you think is best. It may make sense, for instance, to think about how your EECBG subgrants might work to leverage or build capacity for other IIJA and IRA provisions that your office is overseeing. But there are still some items that you'll need to be paying attention to. First is that states must provide the subgrants to their local governments within 180 days of DOE approving your energy efficiency and conservation strategy. The second item of note is that states that are required to do sub-allocations must include in your energy efficiency and conservation strategy a description of your process for providing the subgrants, as well as your plan for the state funds. And then the third piece is, and this is straight from the program notice, states are required to develop a subgrant process that expeditiously allocates funding, prevents fraudulent spending, generates robust reporting, and promotes the EECBG program principles outlined in law. So just a few considerations to be aware of as you go through the subgrant program process. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the eligible activities. As Carolyn mentioned at the top, this is a really flexible program. So there are a wide array of eligible activities, whether strategy development, looking at energy efficiency in buildings and facilities. Importantly, it's good to note that the funds can be used community-wide. It doesn't just have to be for government-owned or publicly owned buildings and facilities. Renewable energy technologies, and newer in the IIJA provision was a provision for financing. So a lot of exciting opportunities here. And I'll turn it over to you, Carolyn, to provide some examples.
Yeah, so from the 2009 funding, just to give some examples, cities use the EECBG for new programs that they created just because they had those funds. They spent it on planned programs that they had on the books but hadn't previously been funded. And they spent the funds on existing programs in their communities. A lot of cities use this funding to retrofit government buildings, to fund energy conservation and efficiency educational campaigns, to retrofit residential and commercial buildings, to deploy solar systems on public buildings, install LED lights, offer rebates and incentives to homeowners and businesses, and start revolving funds and LED traffic lights. So really flexible uses there, and a lot of good things to do for climate and energy in your community. Next slide. Great, so here are a few additional things you need to know, and I'm going to take the first couple and then turn it over to Sandy. So as she was saying, all applicants must submit an energy efficiency and conservation strategy that describes the applicant's goals for increased energy efficiency and conservation in the jurisdiction, and a plan for using the grant funds to achieve those goals. So a couple things you can do here. First, if you have a current energy or climate action plan, that plan can serve as the foundation for the strategy document that must be submitted. And alternatively, you can use your EECBG funds to develop an energy efficiency and conservation strategy. And in which case you'll have 1 year from when you get the award to submit that strategy back to DOE. The good news is that DOE has developed a strategy template to serve as a guide. And two things to keep in mind for local governments. Number one, you must take into account plans for the use of funds by any adjacent city or county if they also received formula funding. And you also must coordinate and share information with your state to maximize energy efficiency and conservation benefits, which is why we're having this webinar today. On vouchers, so this is a new opportunity, a new feature, the ability to exchange your formula grant allocation for a voucher. This is for local governments for either technical assistance or an equipment rebate. DOE strongly encourages local governments to consider the voucher option if your city has limited or no experience managing federal grant awards, or if you have limited internal staff capacity or local capacity to manage this program formula grant over multiple years, or if you're receiving an allocation of $250,000 or less. If you choose this route, you do still have to complete the strategy document, but the application process and the reporting requirements are less. And you do have to choose one method or the other, a grant or a voucher. You can't, for example, say I'm going to take X amount of the grant and X amount as TA. DOE will provide additional information on this voucher application process in the coming weeks or months. The scope of that technical assistance service and the administrative requirements for participating in the voucher program. Next, on blueprints, DOE heard a lot of feedback, including from NLC, that having specific project examples and off-the-shelf projects would be helpful for communities, especially small communities, and especially knowing that the overall funding amounts are smaller this time. So they developed a list of blueprints, which are high-impact projects and programs based on proven strategies that you can choose to follow in putting together your application. They're designed to meet several goals of DOE, and that includes focusing their technical assistance and support in key areas, supporting grantees as they leverage these funds with other infrastructure dollars or other programs, and streamlining the application review and approval process for eligible entities. The blueprints span a wide variety of topic areas from energy planning, energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation infrastructure, workforce development, financing. And again, these are recommended activities that are predetermined as eligible uses of EECBG program funding. Additional information on this will be forthcoming from DOE also. And then on the Justice 40, so the EECBG program falls under the administration's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to direct 40% of certain federal funding towards disadvantaged communities. And this is in order to meet that requirement. States and local governments should map their investments to areas that are considered disadvantaged, and you should consider policies and programs that align with the Justice 40 initiatives, such as decreasing the energy burdens, decreasing environmental exposure to pollution, increasing energy resilience, increasing access to low-cost capital, or increasing access to jobs, particularly those clean energy jobs and pipelines. And one thing to note is that there is a tool from the Council on Environmental Quality called the Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and that is the tool that the administration has determined will be used by the agencies to define what areas are disadvantaged.
Great. And just to continue going down the list, so luckily cost match is not required. I know that that's often a big barrier for many of these federal grants. But DOE does encourage recipients to think about maybe how to leverage some of your private or philanthropic capital partners to help expand the impact of your projects. Build America and Buy American. these requirements may apply on a case-by-case basis. So this will really depend on the nature of the work that you're proposing, i.e. whether it classifies as infrastructure or utilizes specific types of construction materials. And some of these domestic content requirements may require that you source from US manufacturers. And then finally, Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage requirements do apply. So all laborers and mechanics employed by either the recipient or subrecipients or any contractors must be paid wages equivalent to those prevailing on similar projects in the locality. And so for many states and cities, this may require systems to certify payrolls and ensure that these requirements are part of the contracts that you are executing with your partners. Next slide, please. Great. So this is just a snapshot of some of the key dates and deadlines. I definitely encourage everybody to take a look at the one-stop shop that we linked to earlier in this PowerPoint from DOE that has all of these key milestones here. But first, make sure to complete a pre-award information sheet by April 28th. For local governments, you do have to fill out the sheet whether you are thinking about the grant funds or a voucher. If you are taking the voucher, there are fewer questions to answer, and the application material suggests that the review process is expedited generally for that. You should also use these early months to make sure you are registered in the federal systems, including SAMS and FedConnect, which can take several weeks. After you submit the pre-award sheet, DOE will set you up in their system called PAGE, through which you will be able to electronically submit and manage grant performance and financial information. After that, states will have until July 31st to submit their strategy document, and local governments have until January 31st, 2024. And award processing times will vary depending on multiple factors, including the number of applications submitted, the complexity of the proposals, additional review required, for instance, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA review. And so you really want to make sure that you submit a complete application that is responsive so that you're not delayed in receiving the funds. DOE did note that there is sort of a priority order to its review of applications based on this order. So first states, then entities following the blueprints that Carolyn described, then teaming arrangements, then entities with activities benefiting disadvantaged communities, and then entities with activities limited to energy efficiency and conservation strategy development, and then all others. And the reason DOE notes that states will get the top priority is to enable the sub-grant to more localities to happen without delay. So I'll pause there and we'll see if there are any questions. It looks like a few have come through in the Q&A. Great. Carolyn, I'm not sure if you know this, but there was a question about whether there's a list of who was contacted for each eligible county or municipality. Would it have gone through the mayor's office, do you think?
You know, I'm not sure if DOE is proactively contacting local governments. They do have, in addition to that pre-award sheet, they do have an optional contact sheet, and I can find that link and I can drop that in the chat. And so that would be for your city to tell DOE who the main contact is. But I think the best thing is, if you know that you are on the list of a formula city, you just can go and find that information on the DOE hub. But they are going to be having some additional webinars and opportunities for presumably states and local governments to, they mentioned something about office hours. I don't know what the timing is on that, but.
Great, thank you. There's also a question about how does a county or city meet Justice 40 requirements where they have none of these designated areas within their boundaries? That's a great question, and I'm not sure I know exactly. Carolyn, would you happen to know?
I don't, but that is a good one, and it's something that we can raise up to DOE and hope to get an answer on.
Yeah, for sure. And then there was a question about the last category after disadvantaged community focused projects in the review priority. So after that are entities with activities that are limited to energy efficiency and conservation strategy development, technical consulting services, or sort of the higher level planning.
And then the question about the regulatory citations, I think the best spot to point you to, and again, I can find this link as well, is the administrative procedures document, which will tell you kind of all the specifics about this program and how to administer it and how to apply.
Great. And then one final question about whether a CDFA number has been assigned and where to find it. I haven't been able to find it in the application materials, but in the follow-up email that we send to share the recording of this webinar, we'll let you know yes or no whether or not we were able to find it. So thanks for elevating all of these great questions our way. All right. Great. Well, moving on, feel free to continue dropping questions into the Q&A. We're really interested in, you know, what you're thinking about and what you're focused on. But with that, I'm really excited to get us to the fun part, and I'll have Carolyn share some opening words about our local and state leaders.
Yes, thank you. We have a great panel here for some discussion about how cities and states are thinking about using these funds. So first we have Nick Palumbo, who is the alderman in the city of Savannah, Georgia. He's nationally recognized municipal leader on environmental opportunities and serves as a member of NLC's Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Federal Advocacy Committee. He led the Savannah City Council in the landmark 100% Clean Energy Pledge, which launched the city of Savannah to become the largest municipal provider of solar energy in the state of Georgia. He is also the recipient of the Georgia Water Coalition's prestigious Clean 13 Award, and in his spare time, he builds custom electric bikes. Next, we have Pat Showalter, who is the vice mayor of Mountain View, California. Pat is active in regional issues by serving on the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, NLC's Energy, Environment, Natural Resources Committee, and the Water Now Alliance Board. Professionally, Pat is a licensed civil engineer who started her career as a hydrologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, served as the director of the nonprofit San Francisco Creek Watershed Council, and retired after 15 years with the Santa Clara Valley Water District. And finally, we have Christine Berg, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for Local Government at the Colorado Energy Office, whose mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consumer energy costs by advancing clean energy, energy efficiency, and zero emission vehicles to the benefit of all Coloradans. Thank you all for joining.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Perfect. So yes, I'll turn it over to Nick to share some opening words.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here with all of you. And really from coast to coast, you've got Savannah all the way to Mountain View to share ideas. And we're so excited to talk about the things that we're doing here for the city and that can share with your communities. As we stated in the introduction, we did the 100% Clean Energy Pledge. And really that got us the ball rolling on energy efficiency in Savannah. If you've been here and visited in the summertime, you know it gets quite hot. And we've been able to find out that we could save so much money by making our city buildings much more energy efficient and placing solar panels on top of them. It's just that easy. So in our first year, we were able to generate a net positive return of $50,000 a year just in the first year. And we're going to keep the ball rolling on anything and everything here on the coast.
Great. Thanks so much, Nick. Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Pat Showalter, and my town, Mountain View, is about 80,000 strong residents, but we have about 120 people who come to work here. We are located on the San Francisco Bay shoreline, and we think of ourselves as the innovative capital of Silicon Valley. We've been really active in protecting the environment for decades. In fact, in 1976, we changed the name of our planning commission to the Environmental Planning Commission to so that we would concentrate on long-term planning. But I think what's really relevant to this group is that in 2017, we helped form Silicon Valley Clean Energy, where we collaborate with 12 other cities to procure clean energy for our community. And in addition to that, very recently, well, 3 years ago, we passed a new building code that requires all new construction to be electric. So as we move forward on our sustainability goals, the next huge hurdle is really how to electrify our existing building stock. And so that's one of the things we're really excited about with this program. But like Nick, over the years, we have done a great deal to make Mountain View buildings more efficient. And 2 years ago, when they divvied up all the money that had been saved on electricity bills by electrical improvements, it was over $1 million in 10 years. So it's a significant amount of money that can be saved just on city buildings.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of nodding heads around this Zoom screen, Pat. I think you're hitting a good nerve. And last but not least, Christine.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Christine from the State Energy Office here in Colorado, also former mayor of Lafayette, Colorado, where we transitioned from being a historic coal mining town to having more solar per capita than almost any other city in our state. So I'm sort of representing here that partnership with states. We have a lot of really great local government programs, including our energy performance contracting program to help local governments with their investment grade audits. And I like to say it's our concierge service. We help you through the whole process. Building codes, we have a hotline for building codes, not just energy codes, but really thinking about, as local municipalities and counties, how you can partner with the state and use some of those existing resources to really improve your programs or your application. And that's kind of my role here today, is to talk about some of those opportunities.
That's great. Well, thank you all for being here. I feel like you each represent such a unique lens into why it's important to bring states and cities together around really daunting and complex challenges. So I'd love to start really with, what do you see as, the importance of state and local coordination to your work, whether individually or as organizations? And have you had any experiences, whether positive or negative, that can help shine a light on how to encourage better and more robust partnerships? Christine, I might pick on you since you're kind of really in this role in Colorado, but certainly welcome thoughts from everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of amazing sustainability coalitions that work, really in partnership in Colorado. So that helps leverage regional collaborations. I know we have like an electrification cohort as people are reviewing their building codes. And I think my city might be the second in our state to go all electric with both residential and commercial buildings. So, using those best practices, I think that regional piece is really, really important. And what we're looking at doing with our EECBG funds is actually to provide staff capacity to leverage those funds so that particularly rural and mountain communities that aren't going to get direct funding. All we know is when we're in the smaller local governments is there's just not enough time or people and technical support. So that's really my goal with our funding, is to provide that staff capacity and technical support so that on the ground, even if it's just hiring a part-time person who wears a lot of hats, which often is the case in communities, that there's, some sort of human capital to do the work. But I can't overemphasize, reach out to your state energy office and see where you can get maybe some connection with other, nearby communities. Sometimes we have good ideas about, what other local governments are doing similar work, so that it's an easier political request sometimes if other communities have been successful in doing those projects.
Great point. Pat, I see that you unmuted. Anything else to add on that front?
Sure. I would just like to say that we designed a building code that for an electrification building code. We call it a REACH code. And there was a nonprofit, Silicon Valley, Carbon-Free Silicon Valley, that took it upon themselves to go to all the local city councils to push this. And that they were quite successful. And with that, we were able to convince the state to change the building code. And as a civil engineer, I have to say that there is just incredible power in getting the building code changed. It sets the floor, it's the rules. People really don't argue about it, they plan for it. So I'd just like to say that getting things into the building code is just really important. So that was how we had a kind of a progression from grassroots to local governments to the state.
I love that. Yeah, it can be really game changing to change the building code. Nick, feel free to jump in.
And Sandy, there's nothing proprietary about a good idea. We are happy to beg, borrow, and steal. We were not the first city in Georgia to have 100% clean energy pledge, but we have a healthy co-opetition amongst all of us. And we get together with our state municipal league each year in Savannah, and we share ideas of things that have worked, things that didn't, and efficiencies that we have. But it's always about building good relationships with other cities and our state office, because frankly, state offices have a lot more resources than we do, particularly for EECBG funds. That's just going to be your seed money to get a start and to get the framework going. So we've got a couple of irons in the fire there. Some are exciting, some are not, but they're all about helping the people that we serve. And that's what's most important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Christine, I really appreciated your point about trying to build capacity. I think especially with a lot of states and communities being at the front lines now of shepherding the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding and the Inflation Reduction Act funding, as well as all the tax incentives that'll be hitting the ground. This need for capacity is really real and is kind of a big spike right now, as opposed to the past 5 to 10 years. So I'm wondering from all of you, how are you all thinking about maybe ways of integrating the EECBG funds with other projects and programs that might already exist, really how to leverage existing infrastructure and momentum that you have going on? Nick, feel free to jump in. I see you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to give it a shot here. And this has not been finalized yet, but it's true. You need to make something tailor-made that you can leverage these funds as a springboard onto something else. So we're the lucky beneficiary of the largest economic development project in Georgia's history is being built right now outside of Savannah, and it's a Hyundai electric vehicle plant. So we're looking to utilize these funds to set up an electric vehicle car share system through our city's community centers, so that it's not for commuting, but for day trips if you have to go to the grocery store or otherwise, and really to get those EVs into the community and into the hands of people who might not otherwise have access to them, and to get them comfortable with using an electric car and the differences that are there, the advantages that they have, so that when they do gear up for a car purchase next time, it might be an electric one, which helps us all with our goals. So we're looking to leverage that and get that seed money in the framework started so that we can go to our partners at the Economic Development Authority, at the state, and at Hyundai to show them how they can scale this, not just for Savannah, but other regional cities here.
That's amazing. Well, we'd love to include that case study on NASEO's website when it's available. Pat, would you like to add anything?
Sure. We're really interested in how we can electrify our existing building stock. And in Mountain View, 60% of our residents live in apartments and multifamily buildings. And they typically do not have the wherewithal. A tenant, a single tenant, can't really be responsible for electrifying, their own apartment. So we want to work with this money on how to figure out how to electrify some apartment buildings and work with landlords who are interested, and fortunately we have several who are, to help us figure that out. And part of our idea is to make some of these buildings just electrification ready. Many of them are older and their electrical panels aren't really large enough to take on electric stoves and solar panels. So to help them do that so that they're kind of electrification ready. And then in some others, maybe to even go further.
That's really
and the other thing is all of this sort of thing that we do, we do in concert with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which does allow us to procure 100% clean energy for our residents. And it's turned out to be a very valuable organization that we founded. And there are about, I think there are 13 or 17 of these in California, and they all work together. There's a CCA Managers Association that meets regularly to share ideas. And so that's another way that there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination of what works. And I think that this kind of thing is very complicated because when you want to electrify a building, you need an electrician, you need a plumber, you need an HVAC person. I mean, you need permitting. And currently, at least in California, there are not that many contractors who are oriented to do the whole job. So it's very laborious for a citizen or a building owner to get it done. So we want to figure out how to get contractors to work to see this as a single job that they would do all at once and be capable of doing.
amazing. Christine, anything to add from the Colorado perspective or some of the communities you've been engaging?
I wanted to mention there's a program in Fort Collins here in Colorado called the EPIC program, and full disclosure, they have their own utility company, but they actually have a program. It's called EPIC Homes, and it's a one-stop shop for rental properties for energy efficiency upgrades. And they do rebates, and it's really nice because they sort of assist you with the investment grade audits and all of the process by which someone who rents or owns is renting a property or owns a property they rent out. So attached homes, condominiums, apartments. I mean, it's a really difficult sector to break into. To Pat's perspective, it's very challenging, and quite frankly, those are the people who need that the most. They need cost reduction in their energy bills, so it's an equity thing as well. So there are some examples out there in Colorado of being able to leverage some of those funds, and I think the Colorado Energy Office helped to some degree with the financing of that as well. And I wanted to mention revolving loan funds, which I don't know if local governments really tap into that, but I think that's a really interesting way, kind of an evergreen way to use these EECBG funds for energy efficiency upgrades, whether it's for, obviously residential buildings or commercial buildings. We've done a lot of recent legislation requiring a floor to our building codes. We didn't have a state building code requirement, and also benchmarking for buildings over 50,000 square feet. So there was a question in the chat about how why would you want to have maybe similar energy goals or perhaps building codes with other nearby communities? Well, builders, it's nice to have consistency, first of all, depending on where they're building. And also, I can give an example. We had the Marshall Fire here in Colorado where 1,000 homes burned down. And we had a lot of conversations about building codes. And what we're finding is, the builders will rise to the challenge of creating an all-electric model if there's consumer demand. And so that's actually really shifted builder and contractor education around heat pumps, electrification, pre-wiring. Out of that tragedy became really an opportunity to get that information out. And that's kind of changed the conversation in Colorado quite a bit. But in general terms, it helps to have communities work together because they are resource, there's a lack of resources, right? So resource scarcity is the word I was looking for. And it's really important that communities can work together, and it happens faster that way. This electrification cohort, they're looking at building codes. And I think it's counties and cities, maybe 10, and they're really moving quickly towards getting their energy codes updated because they can work together. So I think that's an example, again, of how we as a state can also support regional collaborations and provide that technical support.
That's great. And I'm sorry, I am going a little bit off script, but I think all three of you alluded to this sort of resident engagement, customer engagement, especially in disadvantaged communities, recognizing that there are hurdles to not only reaching those communities, but also those communities being able to make the time and space and get the resources to participate in state and local planning processes. So I'm curious whether any of the three of you have had success or leveraged specific community-based partners to really be able to develop more robust programming that is inclusive of those underserved folks and populations.
Yeah, Sandy, I'll jump in. You know, Savannah's very proud that we just hit our 290th birthday, and we're an old city and a lot of civic engagement from the very beginning in public spaces. And we have 127 neighborhood associations that are out there that are all volunteer, and their neighborhood planning units. It's an excellent way, and it's facilitated by the city of Savannah. And it's a great way to meet the community where they are. Among them are community centers that are right there in the community. And of course, we have local nonprofit organizations like Healthy Savannah and the Harambe House that are working day in and day out to achieve these goals with us. We have a small, we're 150,000 people strong here, and we have a small sustainability office that's just 3 people strong. So we need more partners to be able to do this work, and we need more volunteers. So if other cities are out there looking for an example, please look us up at 100% Savannah, where it was a totally community-driven effort. A lot of volunteers made it possible for the planning document. And as we implement these strategies, it's really built for them and by them. It's worked out well for us.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I will just also do a quick plug. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm part of the Community Environmental Advisory Commission, which really attempts to bring perspectives from the community up to the Sustainability Office, and they sort of do the hard lift of communicating with the state and other partners. But yeah, I think the sort of community-based groups can be really critical voices. So I'm glad you mentioned them. Pat, Christine, anything to add from Mountain View or Colorado on how to engage communities?
Well, we're really blessed with a grassroots organization called Carbon Free Mountain View, and they will not let us forget the need to to produce as clean a climate future as we possibly can. But 2 task force that we have had over the years have been first was convened in 2008, and both of them have served for about 6 months, and they were like, maybe 20 community members, and they put together reports of what should be the action plan to reach our greenhouse reduction goals. And based on that, the city produced action plans. Then in 2017, seemed like it was time for a second sustainability task force. So we convened another one, and they came up with 36 specific recommendations for the city to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And in addition to that, we also have a big adaptation problem. I would presume Savannah does too, because you're on the ocean. We're on San Francisco Bay, so sea level rise protection is also something that's very real to us. And we have a sea level rise protection plan that was first developed in 2012 and was redone last year because things keep moving. So. Those task forces have been a way to really concentrate the effort of the community, and instead of creating a long-term advisory board. And I think there's kind of a toss-up. There are good reasons to do both, but in our case, we've chosen to have the sustainability task force.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I know that you've each mentioned some standout programs and projects that you've been involved in your respective jurisdictions, but knowing that we have an audience of states and cities and other partners that really care about climate and clean energy, do you have any advice to those around the audience, or model programs or examples of projects and programs or strategies that you think have worked really well? So I'll turn it over to you first, Christine, maybe if that's all right, but would love thoughts from everybody. Or Pat, I see that you've unmuted it, so if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, where to start, right? So, I mean, the state has some really great programs that local, governments can build on. We have EV readiness plans, funding for those, EV infrastructure. It's called our Charge Ahead Colorado, really electrifying our scenic byways, things like that, that really, really assist in the economic kind of continuity of some of our tourism areas and stuff. But one program that's really cool is we did a micro mobility e-bike program where low-income folks could apply, and it was so hugely successful, particularly in the Denver metro area, that we got statewide funding. So really thinking as a community, what are the needs that are not being filled at a very micro level, right? So that last mile for public transportation. Again, I mentioned the revolving funds, loans. We have the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, which is a green bank, and certainly local governments here could partner to even build out their energy programs through some low interest financing. But in general, I think, taking a look at what's happening around you in other communities. And to Nick's point, there's some really great ideas, not just in our states and outside of states. I love the neighborhood program you have in Savannah. That's so incredible. Community engagement is key. I think there's a lot to say about the IRA and the funding coming towards folks for solar, and particularly local governments. The 30% direct pay is a game changer for solar, battery storage, and geothermal. And so having that major discount and access to a rebate, I think, is something local governments really need to incorporate into their EECBG plans, because that is and it's not capped, and it's, laddered out over many, many years. This is the biggest piece of legislation in our lifetime to really tackle climate change in our own backyards. So yeah, I think reach out. There's lots of great organizations throughout the country, including ICLEI, which is Local Governments for Sustainability. We'll be working with them to provide technical support. So yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is, before you write your application, is talk to everybody, right? Talk to your constituents, talk to some of the local nonprofit organizations that are providing sustainability support, and certainly your neighbors and the state. So it's well worth it to build something that utilizes and leverages other funding and programming.
Thanks, Christine. That's really great advice. Pat, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I'd like to say that one thing, I mean, there's been a bunch of things that have been very successful. Our solar program has been very successful, and really the state and federal taxes are just, make a huge difference. The Silicon Valley Clean Energy collaboration is very powerful. But one thing I just wanted to say is, sort of as a general rule, is measuring things so that you can report back how much money you've saved or how many people you've reached, and you can celebrate those things. I just think that's really valuable. I mean, for us, we for a while we were only measuring the GHG emissions for, every other year. And it took a long time to do the inventory to figure out what that actually was. So it seemed like the data was really stale. So one of the things we've done is now we do an annual one, and it still takes quite a while to get the data together, but letting everybody know, where are we on this trajectory to reaching our goals, and what are the what are the ancillary benefits to that? Are really important. And in our community, I was glad you mentioned bikes, Christine. In our community, I think one of the biggest ones is we've had this explosion. It can't happen fast enough for many people. And bike lanes. I mean, Mountain View is pretty flat and we have nice weather, and really it's great as a bicycle area, but it needs to be, your streets need to be safe to, for people to feel comfortable to do that. And we have a trail system too. But anyway, that I think that those things have made a really big difference. And I would just like to urge people that things that get measured, gets paid, and monitored, get paid attention to.
Yeah, great point.
Pat is right. What gets measured is what gets done. I mean, that's our saying here at the city. And find in your community where you can get some movement. I'm very envious right now of Pat and her bike lanes. We have not been. It's something that we have an opportunity for, and a lot of growth here at Savannah to do more with that. But never let a good crisis go to waste. A couple of years back, we were having an enormous debate about sea level rise and what's actually happening. So we went out there and we didn't have very many funds to do it, but we partnered with a local high school to build sea level sensors and got Georgia Tech involved. And you can check it out at sealevelsensors.org. And we've installed 63 sensors around Chatham County, and they cost, I think it was about $100 a piece to build at the high school. We put a Raspberry Pi in there and they're sending real-time data. I mean, you're just making work and doing it on your own. That primed the pump and got us ready for this enormously successful bipartisan infrastructure law that was able to juice that with a couple of $1 million. It's something we never anticipated would have happened. We just did it on our own, but laying that groundwork first, and you can do that with these funds that are available now. Lay the groundwork for the next big one, the next infrastructure law and next infrastructure bill that comes through, and talking to your senators, your congressmen about what you're working on to bring that to life and those implementation dollars, because you never know what's around the bend.
Yep. Really well said. Well, thank you all so much. This has been an absolutely stellar discussion. I'm so grateful for your insights and willingness to share with other states and cities what you're working on and what you're planning. So I'm really excited about seeing what's next in Colorado and in Mountain View and Savannah. So again, thank you, Pat, Nick, and Christine for being part of this conversation. Next up, I'm going to turn the floor over to Audrey Bragg with E for the Future, who's been hard at work preparing programs in a box and policies in a box, which she'll walk through. But essentially, these are sort of starting points that states and cities can use to maybe think about how to prepare for and use your funds for EECBG. So Audrey, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you again.
Great, thank you, Sandy. As the slides are getting pulled up, I'm going to place a link in the chat. This is to the microsite for our programs in a box. So in response to funding from IIJA for EECBG, NASEO, and E4 began a webinar series to help prepare states for federal funding. In addition to recapping how EECBG happened under ARA, E4 and NASEO developed an idea to create examples of energy programs, which included example documents such as RFPs, applications, communications materials. And this initiative eventually turned into the programs in a box. We expanded the model to include example policies in a box, which detail how states can develop policies on specific topic areas. Next slide, please. So currently we have 6 programs in a box, including 2 on energy codes, a shared energy facility manager, a planning programs in a box, weatherization, and workforce. And then we just recently launched our first policy in a box, which is on electric vehicle supply equipment. And next slide, please. As discussed earlier, DOE has developed an application instructions for states and communities applying for EECBG funds, and DOE included a list of project areas that are labeled blueprints. These blueprints were selected by DOE because they represent energy projects that have shown high impact and consistent success in the past. With DOE showing a clear preference for projects that fit the eligible blueprints, we've included a list on this slide and ask that you select your top 3 project areas that you're interested in. NASEO and E4 will be taking this feedback to help prioritize the development of new programs and policies in a box. And that's designed to support state energy offices, staff, and municipal governments. Great. And I believe there's a couple other questions on here as well that Grace will discuss.
Yes, thanks everyone for answering these poll questions. Keep them coming. I think we have about 20–30% answered so far, and it looks like energy efficiency and workforce development, as well as EV infrastructure, are top of the list so far, but welcome you to keep providing your top 3 on this first question.
And Grace, it looks like all 3 questions came up maybe at the same time, so we might want to just move on to the next slide as well, just to provide some more context for questions 2 and 3.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that, everybody. Yes, so for the second 2, the next couple questions, we're really hoping to find out what would be helpful to you all, and sort of how your existing coordination is happening, whether you're a state agency. If you are a state agency representative, are you in regular communication with your local governments? And if you're a local government representative, are you in contact with your state energy office? So that's question 2, just yes or no. And then would you like help getting connected with your counterpart NASEO or NLC member? And if so, we would be happy to help bridge that gap and direct you to the right person. So again, just another yes or no question. And I think most people have completed the poll, looks like. All right, but I'll just leave it open a few more seconds. And then we also have a few additional resources. Sandy, if you'd like to highlight those.
Sounds great. Thank you all for indulging us in these poll questions. I think they're super helpful to help us direct our focus to the appropriate programs that are of most interest to you. And of course, we're really at NASEO and NLC really interested in connecting you with one another. And so don't hesitate either to fill out the poll or to contact Carolyn or me or Grace if you'd like any introductions to either the state energy offices or the NLC members. This final slide is just a few additional resources. So we'll plan to share these PowerPoint slides in a follow-up note in a few days along with the recording, so that you can click through onto these hyperlinks. But again, just some, I think probably the most important link is this DOE EECBG hub, which has links to formula allocations, pre-award information. Again, it's the one-stop shop to get you through these various milestones through the EECBG application process. A year or so ago, NASEO and NLC had the opportunity to develop a blog together on state and local partnership opportunities. So we encourage you to check out that blog post that has just a few examples and ideas for how to make the most of EECBG funding. NASEO, on our webpage, we also have an infrastructure hub that has some more information and resources, particularly on EECBG, but also Buy American and prevailing wage requirements, including a webinar that we co-hosted with E for the Future a few months ago on that topic. And finally, the E for the Future and NASEO Programs in a Box resource page that Audrey presented on. And with that, I think we can go on to the next slide. So just a final thank you from me at NASEO. So grateful to our amazing panel to have had the opportunity to chat with Nick, Pat, and Christine about your amazing work, and also to Carolyn and Audrey for being great partners. Carolyn, any final words?
No, I want to thank everyone for joining today. Feel free to reach out to any of us as you're trying to navigate the EECBG process, or if you need connections, but really appreciate everyone joining, and appreciate Sandy and Audrey and Grace for all your help, and of course our panelists for sharing their experiences. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. We'll keep the poll question results up for a little bit in case you're interested in scrolling through, but have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all.